after this. You got to know what after it is. Got it? In chapter 5, Jesus was in Jerusalem. Chapter 5 of John's Gospel. If anybody wants to follow along, you can open up your Bibles and see what I'm talking about. In chapter 5, Jesus was in Jerusalem. And he really ticked off the religious authorities because he healed somebody on the Sabbath day. I use the word tick. He really ticked off the religious authorities because he healed somebody on the Sabbath, which was against the law. And they had a few things to say about that. And his response to them was to say, very truly, I tell you, this is in chapter 5, verse 19, very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And he will show him greater works than these, so that you will be astonished. And they went on and on. The discourse is long until verse 30. This is a significant verse, where John's Jesus says, I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek to do not my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. Okay. After this, somehow, Jesus, who had been in Jerusalem in the last chapter, shows up in Galilee. And everybody's going, well, how did he get there? All the commentators say, whoever edited this book the last time mixed up the sequence of the chapters, and the chronology is all messed up. But anyway, we're at chapter 6, and suddenly Jesus is in Galilee. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover festival, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and he saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread for these people to eat? He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. And Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people? Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now, there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they did, sat down, about 5,000 in all. And then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him their king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Thus ends the reading of the word. Now, this feeding story, these feeding stories, actually appear in all 4 of the Gospels in some different form or another. And you've all heard them before. You've heard the feeding of the 5,000 before, haven't you? Sure you have. You've heard Mark's version and Luke's version, and you've heard Matthew's version of the story. And the characters who are in this story are, well, they're pretty interesting, I'd say, but there's something significant about the symbolism that John uses in his story. One of the things he mentions is that it was the time of the Passover, a festival of the Jews, he writes. Well, the Passover, we know everybody's supposed to be in Jerusalem. Every adult Jew is to be in the city of Jerusalem for the Passover in order to celebrate it appropriately. And what was the Passover about? The Passover is about giving thanks to God for liberating the Israelites from captivity in Egypt. You all know that. Basic Sunday School 101. Here he is on this mountainside, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, I think this is a wonderful story, and what I'm going to do is detail the story for you, just because I have to detail the story. We have Jesus, who John says is testing his disciples. He took them up the hill, they sat at the top of the hill, and there were 5,000 people, and there are other commentators who like to say it's more than 5,000 because they only counted men, they didn't count women, so if there were women and children with them, it was more than 5,000. I don't care. The text says 5,000 overall. Okay, that's enough. If you're going to go to a concert at the Greek, it's about the same size. The Greek Theater in LA holds 5,780 people. Okay? It's not a Rolling Stones concert. It isn't the memorial service for Michael Jackson. But it's a substantial amount of people. Now, this hill in Galilee, there actually is a hill like this in Galilee. It's absolutely gorgeous. It overlooks the Sea of Galilee, and it's very green, very grassy and green. It's beautiful. And there are those who have said that throughout history, this hill has been seen as a place of perfect acoustics. Say that 5 times fast. A place of perfect acoustics. You can stand at the top of the hill, and the people at the base of the hill can hear you. There's no PA system. There's no microphone to fiddle with. They can hear you from the top of the hill to the bottom. This is the place that I imagine Jesus has gathered with his disciples, and 5,000 people who have come to see him work miracles. It's interesting that it's in his mind around the time of the Passover, when the Passover centers around seders. It centers around food. It's interesting that what comes to mind is how they're going to feed these 5,000 people. Who cares? Did they make an announcement? Did they put up placards in the city and say, come on up on the hill and have Jesus feed you? That was not the purpose of the event. The purpose of the event was people were following behind. They didn't come to be fed. They came to see. They came to hear. But Jesus changes the context of the whole gathering. Jesus suddenly says to his disciples, oh my goodness, how are we going to buy something for these people to eat? Philip is going, oh, there he goes again. You know, you're out of your mind. 6 months' wages wouldn't feed these people even a scrap. But Andrew, and I'm figuring, I'm watching the disciples scramble suddenly, going throughout the crowd to see if there's anybody who's got any food. And Andrew comes